This first poem that I'm reading, I chose it. Did I choose it or did it choose me? But I chose to start off with this poem in part because it takes on a scientific lens, and here we are. And also because it is after, not a poet, but a student from Harvard who was recorded as the first Indigenous person to graduate from Harvard. And the poem is an erasure in 3 parts, so we dwindle as we move on. It opens with an epigraph that reads that the poem is after a 1904 entry in the student file of Alfred de Grasse, member of the Wampanoag Nation. And it's called Inquiry into the Lineage of Watermelons. Watermelon is a flowering plant species in the Cucurbitaceae family, a family of gourds. Its scientific name, Citrullus lanatus, is borrowed from Greek and Latin and translates to citrus of wool or woolly citrus, characterizing the plant's seed. The watermelon is a scrambling vine plant that bursts yellow flowers and a large fruit. The fruit is effectively a berry with a calloused rind. The flesh is a deep red to light pink with black seeds splattered across the inside. The rind is striped and is described as a mid to dark green. Sweet and composed of 91% water, the plant is a refreshing nibble from the heat of simmer or while watching television. It can be cut and tossed into salads or juiced. Watermelon has a multitude of uses and over 1,000 different breeds. Highly cultivated, the watermelon is grown in tropical or temperate regions and is reported as having a climbing habit. The watermelon is both male and female and is also neither. Notably, however, the female plant bears the brunt of the fruit. Having an existence recognized as far back as 30 BC, the watermelon originated in West Africa. Its present globalization can be attributed to European colonizers who enslaved Africans during the triangular slave trade. Africans carried the ancestral knowledge of the berry. The fruit was a popular crop amongst freed blacks during the antebellum and became a symbol of freedom. 2, inquiry into lineage. A flowering plant species, family of gourds, borrowed, of wool or scrambling, bursts of fruit with calloused, flesh deep black splattered across, sweet and composed nibble, heat of simmer, cut, tossed, or juice, multitude of use, grown and is reported a climbing brunt fruit, existence as far back as the watermelon, slave ancestral, a crop freed became. 3, lineage. Species of wool, bursts of flesh, splattered, sweet as watermelon. I've been obsessed with sonnets. And so the next 2 are love poems, if you will. The first is called, Before He Was Deported, My Father Taught Me to Fish Like a Man. Good man, my father was. He could catch the best God had to offer and the worst. Like devout fishermen, we were religious at the lake. My image swimming in my father's reflection. Girl learning man, man girl learning to eat, to cast a line like how The country did, split a border between my father and I, halved like a fillet, croakers flopping onto the beach of our mother countries. It took years to unlearn anger. I wanted only to drown in the blood of my father, cast away, body bone swallowed up, how hunger never allows you to keep who it is that you love. Also, a sonnet called I Assign My Students Final Presentations. The poet says skinny black trees, and all I think is black. Skinny black kids, skinny black legs dangling off the side of lips like lollipops, skinny black limbs, skinned knees, black with hope, skinned black hope, so thin it vanishes like a line lynched on the horizon. What's right with me? Am I wired to think like a gravekeeper, pallbearer, whose child, rancid with morbidity, am I? Do I belong to God? Is God bound back to black like this, all rope and loose neck, all cross and clean hands, no skinny blood spilled, and still grief coffles my mouth like a chain gang. The student finishes. A. No. A+. It's very quiet in here. I have a lot of poet friends who like to say, it's not a library, you know. This is called, oh, this is weird. And it's called, I just had to throw something strange in the mix. Sometimes I eat. Once, out of anger, I told a lover I wanted to gobble her up, devour her bones until we were both dust. I am that thirsty. I thirst for a meal forged from the dainty fingers that feed me. Once, just the two of us had a picnic alongside the Charles, and I slurped the whole bank of water between my cheeks. Bass, perch, newt, eel, and all, I did not stop. I did not leave the city a drop of blood. In bed, I say grace before I swallow. I swallow. When I am alone, I skip over my prayers. The hunger is enough to forsake my God body. I cheated. Confession. Sometimes I play with my food because I am enamored with the sounds. I slosh my face in her wide mouth, nape of breasts, nails, toes, licked, even the eyeballs, like bad apples, ravished and ravish ready, sweetie pie. You are not a term of endearment. Starved, I want all of you consumed. I desire her, all of me, gone. Yeah, totally strange. This next poem is a part of, I guess I keep writing writing in this form, which is the contrapuntal. Folks have heard of the contrapuntal? Yeah, oh, I like that, of course, like duh. But for folks who haven't heard, it is a form that is inspired by the musical definition of it, but it is in essentially three parts, right? There's a poem on this side, there's a poem on this side, and then across, they also make a poem, and for some reason, that's the only poems I've been writing, so welcome. This one is about Rodney King, who you know was not killed by police, but severely beaten by police in the 90s, and was probably the first one that was recorded and that went viral, even though, you know, it was on a home video camera. And again, Rodney did not die. You know, he went through the trial and was granted money, but I keep asking myself, how does one live after that, or what does life look like, or how do you form a life after something like that? And years later, He drowned in his swimming pool. And so I've been writing a lot about Black folks in water, and entered a conversation with him at that context. Um, and so the first side of this poem is called Rodney King Mistakes the Deep End of His Swimming Pool for the Atlantic. Or, dry land ain't never been for Black folk. The earth taketh away, swallowing who it knows to be a grieving thing, whom else incites a fire, ignites a riot, a billy club built a man from dust. A nigga was only heading home, and now home is a camera flash, a drowning in a bottle and bathtub. I'm sure there is a dirge looping that Rodney fell into, a hell opening again, except each time you reach God, you unbecome. And where do you go after you've been resurrected in the flesh? And is that where Black is? LA asphalt cross? No, water is sulfur, a baptismal in a pool, a communion of blood can be an ocean. And 2, police brutality is a middle passage, is a flood. The water knows this. As a nigga cometh, so shall then we depart. Ask the ocean, how many came by sea, by salt? Salt water has a perfect memory, so be it. All of us are trying to get back where we came from. Rodney gave up the ghost like his daddy, both on Father's Day. There is a quote about lineage that doesn't quite fit, but no, not much fits nor opens except death, except think of this more as unborn. And where do you go if you are unborn? A womb? Backyard swimming pool? Is that holy enough? A hole at the bottom of the CCC. We promise we are always looking for a way home. And a cross called Rodney King Mistakes the Deep End of His Swimming Pool for the Atlantic, or police brutality is a middle passage, is a flood. Dry land ain't never been for Black folk. The water knows this. As a nigga, the earth taketh away, swallowing who cometh, so shall then we depart. Ask the ocean. It knows to be a grieving thing, whom else? How many came by sea, by salt? Salt water incites a fire, ignites a riot. A billy club has a perfect memory, so be it. All of us are built. A man from dust. A nigga was only trying to get back to where we came from, heading home, and now home is a camera flash. Rodney gave up the ghost like his daddy. A drowning in a bottle and bathtub, both on Father's Day. There is a quote, I'm sure. There is a dirge looping about lineage that doesn't quite fit, but know that Rodney fell into a hell opening again, except not much fits nor opens except death, except each time you reach God, you unbecome. Think of this more as unborn. And where do you go after you've been? And where do you go if you are unresurrected in the flesh and born a womb? Backyard swimming pool? Is that where Black is? LA asphalt cross? Is that holy enough? A hole? No. Water is sulfur. A baptismal in a pool at the bottom of the CCC. We promise a communion of blood can be an ocean. We are always looking for a way home. And this, thank you guys for engaging in this way. I'm gonna read 2 more. We'll see how this goes. This was a commissioned poem. We were talking a little bit about serving as a laureate and writing poems often on commission or on ask and request. But this was, I think, for a podcast that was done by Ben and Jerry on race. And specifically, they asked about a poem regarding the first slave ship in America. And this is called I cannot wade through the past without waking the dead. I cannot weigh wailing, summoning the history as the present of this country is homing the haunting, honing the howls, the clang of cuffs, calling chains a lineage. The power of the tongue is the difference between the new world and the old. A savage and savagery, a colonist and killer. Manifest destiny is the law of attraction, is conjuring under a different guise. Language is a spell. Wish and curse. Declare independence and the war ensues. Declare the land your country and the soil gaseous crimson. Declare a human as slave and no one asks how bright the color clipping her universe is. History is a complex wordsmith. The first slave ships forged in this country were named Desire, Prosperity, Fortune, and Hope. Desire was built on a summer lawn in Salem and set sail in 1637. The ship, a vessel, a belly, a black hole, sold indigenous folks to the Caribbean in exchange for Africans to slave the colonies. A body for a body, a life for a lie, cargo to carcass, desire, from the Latin desidero, meaning to wish to obtain, to long for, to lust after what one loathes. Learn one man can claim desire and conquer all another man desires. One can lust after another once, and the thirst is forever in drought. America, namesake after a conqueror, calls a slave ship hope, and it becomes a blueprint for the future. Calls a boat a fortune, and all aboard become possessed possession. History has a way of repeating itself, or history itself is repeating, or history is a reaping. Ghost gunshot locking us in the open field of an eye, the bodies policed to pavement, the ballot exchange for bullet, plantation for prison, death for life, lie and lingo. What you damn damns you. The conqueror, America, labels us and we reshape it endearing. Names us ghetto and we craft culture. Labels us your desire and we say from the Latin phrase decidus, meaning from the stars, as in emerging from the black hole of a ship's bows, as in them folks came from a dark galaxy, as in them folks a heavenly body, celestial beings shafted, shackled constellations, night skying the ground. And I just want to thank you guys so much. That's my time. I'm coming back up for the Q&A.
Keep it going for Porsha Olayiwola, our own poet laureate here in Boston. Thank you so much for kicking us off tonight, Porsha. Good evening, everyone. I'm James Monroe. I'm the creative director of programming here at the museum and our Centers for Public Science Learning, and I get to be serving as kind of your host for the rest of the evening. And I have the honor of introducing our next performer, Louise Bernice Halfe, Sky Dancer, to the stage. However, before we do bring her up, I wanted to note our Q&A. After Louise's performance, I'll be back, and I'll invite both Louise and Porsha to join me on stage here, and we'll answer some of your questions. So if you have a question for Porsha or Louise, you can submit that at any time by pulling out your smartphones, whether you're here in the room or watching at home online. Thank you for tuning in. And go to slido.com and enter the code SKYDANCER, all one word, just as it appears on the screen. And then once the program wraps in here, for those who did come out in person tonight, we invite you to stick around for a reception right down in the Blue Wing with Porsha and Louise, and that's all thanks to our friends at the General Consulate of Canada in Boston. But now it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage our next performer of the evening. Louise Bernice Halfe, sky dancer, was raised on Saddle Lake Reserve and attended the Blue Quills Residential School. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in social work from the University of Regina. She also completed 2 years of addictions counselor training at St. Albert's Nietzsche Institute, where she also facilitated the program. She served as Saskatchewan's Poet Laureate for 2 years and has traveled for her poetics and presented at numerous conferences. Her books include Bare Bones and Feathers, Blue Marrow, The Crooked Good, Soketa, Awasis Kinky and Disheveled, Burning in This Midnight Dream, and more. She has received accolades and awards, including honorary doctorates from Wilfrid Laurier University, the University of Saskatchewan, and Mount Royal University. She served as the National Parliamentary Library Poet Laureate from 2021 to 2022. She also serves as an elder or knowledge keeper at the University of Saskatchewan, the Saskatchewan Health Authority, and others, and she actively participates in cultural and ceremonial activities relevant to her Plains Cree culture. And tonight we are so honored to have her here in Boston and at the Museum of Science. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Louise Bernice Halfe, sky dancer.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Mr. President. It's Tim, right? And thank you, Porsha, for such a powerful voice, and for David and Margaret for hosting us, and for my partner, Peter, who has been looking after me. I was just telling Porsha what a beautiful name she carries. It reminded me of water. Ironically, it's just so graceful. Ginaskum nao gakyo petagote ke pentu toig mstahid mi waitin ni stahote beg yugan. Newatski sigamo kamin kanimi toxini and sigason huni jiskapune hote. I'm so delighted to be here amongst you this evening and to be sharing my poetics. That is my first language is Nehio, which means four bodies. And the tribe is called Cree, but that's an Anglo-Saxon word. So I just call myself Nehio. I am from the stars, and you are from the stars. I'm just sharing that with you. We are made of stardust and of energy. And that's my contribution from my community is that we do believe we are from the stars, way, way far in the heavens. And everything on this earth, on this planet, is made from stardust. And we leave our breath in the wind, everything that has existed on this planet, including you and I, when we pass, we leave our breath in the wind. Our elder has taught us when you cry and your head is bent down like this and your tears fall to your chest, the waters will lead you home, is what he said. And I found it interesting when I was looking at Newsfeed that a man slithered into the Twin Tower waters the other day. And they said he was mentally challenged. And I thought, well, he's looking for a way home. And I found it also curious to ask, how did they come up with that image of water for the Twin Towers? Can anybody answer that? Anyway, you can tell me later. And we women are water carriers because we give birth. We give the juices from which everyone is born from. So that was my message from the water image that you were so kind to share with us. Thank you. They're so powerful. So I'm going to read from Sugeta, which is selected poems from all of my works, except for Awasis, and Kinky and Disheveled didn't make it into this collection. But I have left my books with the various libraries and various people I've been interacting with, and the Canadian Consulate will have all copies as well. This first one, when I first published, I sent my books to the Vatican. And the Vatican wrote back to me and said, "We've noted the contents of your books." So what I want to read is from the first poem. It's called Dear Poop. Dear Poop, forgive me for writing on this newspaper. I found it in the outhouse, saw lines that say you was sorry. Some of my Indian friends say is good, but some of them say you sorry don't walk. So I was sitting here thinking that maybe we'd talk. Say, I always want to tell you to stay out of my business. If me wants to talk to trees and build nests in house, that's up to me. If me wants to pitch my tent and feed the ghost bannock and berries and maybe throw some Indian popcorn for you, Jesus, that's up to me. I don't ask forgiveness, not one hand Mary's or step ladder to heaven. Me is happy with the sky, the bird Inuak, four-legged Inuak. I is happy. Sorry means that I don't need your church and your priest telling me what to do. Sorry mean that I'm free to talk to Manitou, the plants and the spirits. That's all for now, Poop. Maybe we talk again next time I see you in the newspaper in the outhouse. And that was from Bare Bones and Feathers. This one is called Poagan. Poagan in my language means dream and my guardian. And this is from an epic poem, and it's about the great-grandmothers. Poagan, voice dancer. Poagan, the guardian of dreams and visions. Prayer brings to you this gift. Glory be to Ugamau, Waskegan, to Nukum, Atayugan, to Poagan, as it was in the beginning, is now and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Amen. The walk began before I was a seed. My mother strung my umbilical cord in my moccasins. When I was a grasshopper, Nimosu, my grandfather, would open a big book. His fingers traced the path of syllabics, mouth moving quietly. Long after Nimosu died, my memory went to sleep. I woke in the mountains, lying in the crook of my white husband's arms, cocooned in the warmth of the teepee. Nimosum took my fingers and guided me through his book. Another old man sat in a grove of trees, lifted his pipe, my hands on the stem. When I returned to the cabin, I filled the pockets between the logs with papers, stacked the walls with my books. A man, braids hanging past his shoulder, laughed. Still in my walks, the mountains beneath my feet, I picked feathers as I climbed, the wolves gentle in their following. Soon, the mountains too had feet. I swam down her clear water and stood naked beneath her falls. Nearby, wind-burned fences and closed crosses, their hinged gray arms dangled. I heard screams and a gunshot in the early dawn. After the fierce weeping of thunder and mad dash of lightning, the robins danced with the drumming of the little people. I woke as the brilliant ribbon of northern lights melted into a sunrise. I was stuck. The weasel untangled my braids, ran down my heart, while Nuka, my grandmother, sat at the foot of the bed. Her weight shifting as she sang. I walked up the mountain again, loaded with gifts. Astam, come, she said. She rubbed my eyes with her sweat, and I saw her many faces. Each face sat at the altar with one large eye. We picked chokecherries, lip-stained, crushed them between the rocks. In her cabin, where Newcomb waited, was a stone boat stacked full of her belongings, spotted blue enamel plates, oversized spoons, crazy quilts. She invited all of my relatives to her feast. She sang, her voices echoing through the cabin. As I slept through the songs, my hands became rocks too heavy to lift. Ants scurried in and out of the cracks, carrying crumbs, chewing bits of dirt, digging many holes, eggs squirmed. I'm awake now and remove my ring. When I married him, I dragged the cord past the road where my reserve ended. Eyataskit, they said. I put my land elsewhere when I became his wife. The prairie is full of bones. The bones stand and sing, and I feel the weight of them as they guide my fingers on this page. See the blood? On my left breast was a hoof print. It disappeared when I began the walk. Ukamawaski, full of grace. The creation is filled with thee. Blessed are thou among Iskwewak, the woman, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb. Holy Mother of all of us, pray for us, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Thank you. This one is called Keeper of the Stories. Achamunis, which means legend keeper. They hobbled, limped, shuffled, pink, purple, blues, red, yellows, white, black, printed blaze, calico dresses, shawls, kerchiefs, blankets, dried flowers, old sweat, and sweet perfume. They teased, laughed, joked, and gossiped, ran their fingers through each swinging hand, pipe smoke swirling, men drumming our songs. I watched them, hundreds of my husband's family. They've traveled across Canada, the United States, rejoice at recognizing one another, some for the first time. Each has brought a book they've lovingly compiled. It contains the history of their migration from England, Norway, and into the Dakotas. They are scattered throughout Turtle Island. They marvel at the trek of their ancestors. The click of wine glasses echoes through the arbor of this large family gathering. And 5 Indians. I, the eldest, my children and 2 other Indian youth. They are not yet aware how this affects their lives. Who are we? Adopted, I gather inward. How many of my relatives were cattled onto the reservation during this settlement? How much of my people's blood was spilled for this migration? Laughter and wonder as fingers move across the atlas. This is where great-granddad, Arnie, crossed on the barge. This is where great-granddad traveled and preached the law of the land, where his wife Isabel taught the little savages to read. My lips are tight from stretching when my small family is introduced alongside the large extended family. Later, driving home, I weave a story for my children, how their great-grandma rode side-saddled, waving her 22 in the air, trying to scare those relatives away. I tell them how my relatives lived around the fort, starving and freezing, waiting for diluted spirits and handouts from my husband's family. I tell them how their little children died wrapped in smallpox blankets. My breath won't come anymore. I stare at the wheat fields. Thank you. Listen to the story. We lived in tents, teepees, before the four walls, before the ugly broken years. Ears witnessed the story, my mother, a spin, unfurled. A spin sat on a feathered buckskin blanket, fingers bent willows. She dipped in the pail for red-stained roots, her voice rising, falling. Smoke curled toward the teepee's arms. Fire crackled in front of her. Kaya sesa, long time ago, our people were filled with mystery and unexplainable powers. Egi matausatik, this mystery. We listened, skewered, waited long for this night, waited for the river to wear her ice suet clothes, waited to wear our snowshoes and track rabbits, waited, waited. The story nod teased our infant heavens, the strawberry veins wrapped and nestled our hearts, the rolling head, chichipes tuguan. Kaya sesa, a man and a woman left the main camp with their two little boys. They traveled and traveled and traveled thick into the forest, thighs sucked in muskeg. The family fed the mosquitoes. They gathered blueberries and cranberries, pin and bunchberries, mushrooms, rose hips, and mint and muskeg. Juncos, chickadees, nuthatches, and whiskey jacks flew, scolding. Squirrels hoarded pine cones and hazelnuts. In the thicket, bear, moose, elk, deer watched. The family pitched their tent upon a promise of birth and aspen syrup, spruce needle chews. A creek sang itself into a gorged lake. Here, shadows wave. Saga still, dawn. Peeled the night cloud, stretched into daylight. The man gathered his hunting tools, bannock and rabbit. He was gone all day. Baksamuta, the evening sun, carried into the darkness and pulled up her night blanket. The man returned, supper unmade, wood untouched, his wife's tanning undone. Husband took a swig of tea, poked the embers, studied her basket. Our moccasins slipped into our ears. We sat, tongues possessed. We learned how to feed the sky dancers. We in fat in the owl dance of their death. Drums and songs beckon them to rise and give them form. A spin crumbled a tobacco leaf, lifts it, feeds the fire. Her voice guttural, wind, silent flames creep, fix the air with small stairs. And you're going to have to read the story. It's an epic poem. Thank you. When I left for residential school, where I spent my life for 7 years, 6 years, 7 years, I didn't know the impact it had on my parents, so I had to because they never spoke about it. So this is what we left behind. The reserve went quiet. The playground went silent. A lone robin hopped in the expanse of the yard where once children scraped their elbows and knees, drew lines in the dirt for hopscotch, or designated the imaginary rooms of a house and lined the cupboards with mud pies. The yard, now empty, where once a lively baseball field of excited runners wore out trails between first base and third. Where once the home base was a tattered mound of scraped up dirt and scraggly grass. I see this now. I never saw the searing pain on my mother's face, nor experienced my father's eyes squeezed to dam his flood. Their world went mute when the piper played his organ through the reservation. My parents never spoke of that gash that tore through the families and gutted the whole reserve. Thank you. How's my time? I could just see bodies out there. I don't see faces. Okay, 2 poems. Con game. The children were meat for the scavengers, Indian affairs, the brick walls, the saints of many churches. Filled with their disease, we ate the maggots off their dead. This cannibalism devoured our mother's hearth. Yes, I followed this routine, clapping hands in electric light on our knees to give the Christ a difficult time. No time to rub the sleep from our eyes. Each month I counted the stars to see how often I'd gone to Mass, my heart so wanting. Marched to breakfast, to the scullery, hand-peeled potatoes, washed the many pots and pans under the supervision of the kitchen nuns. To the laundry room to starch and iron, to the rectory to serve the higher saints, and finally to school to swallow Europe. In those many seasons, our winds took a turn and entered winter. When we were released with no hair to braid, no language to call our own, no parent to cradle us, those storms awoke. And this last one. I don't know if you're familiar with the term lateral violence. Okay, so it's when people go and they go to the interior of their lives and they hurt each other. And this is called uspagan. This is our sacred pipe. But somebody was named Uspagan. He sat between the women, told a story of how the ancient elders taught white men and their native brides that their half-blood children had no right to the pipe, to the ceremonies. How this teaching applied to this present day when these people, he prophesies, took their last breath. They would remain as wandering ghosts, disturbing the present peace of their lost land. When the women spoke of their ancient grandmothers, spoke of being outcasts, and how this applied to this present age, they spoke of the love of their mixed-race children, the love they shared with their men, the condemnation that walked from that man's tongue, cut their bloodline and spilled it. They arose and left him with his bitterness and hate. They returned to their families. All my relations, thank you. Hi.
Let's have another hand for Louise, please. And I'm going to ask both Porsha and Louise to join me on stage. Porsha, you can take a seat over there. Keep it going. As we're getting settled, a reminder, please, this is your chance to ask both of them any questions you may have. And you can do so by pulling out that smartphone and going to slido.com and entering the code SkyDancer, all one word, and we'll get to those. First of all, thank you both so much for those incredible performances and readings. I feel very inadequate to be sitting on stage after both of those, so thank you for appeasing me and thank you for sharing. I want to start, there's some questions that have come in that actually mirror a question I had to start. Louise, for those who are watching who may not be familiar, we've heard this term a lot tonight. What does the role of Canada's Parliamentary Poet Laureate encompass? What is a Poet Laureate?
Actually, you know, I was given a lot of free reign as a poet, so I could do what I wanted. But I had to bow to certain rules, which was I had to be, what is the word, partisan? You know, non-partisan. Okay, I couldn't condemn them. I wrote poetry for the senators of the country. They would email me or call me directly, and it was poetry on demand. And so that's what I did for them. But I couldn't charge them for that because the government paid for my stipend. And then the Parliamentary Library owns my work. I can, although I have copyright, I can't take it and publish it because it is public money, and I might make somebody mad. So,
and you were the Poet Laureate for 2 years.
Yes.
Were there any highlights during those 2 years, during that experience that stick out to you?
I think the greatest highlight for me was writing poetry on demand. You know, because it forced me to think outside of my normal thinking pattern per se, right? And it brought me to places that I wouldn't dream of thinking of writing about, to be honest. So it was fun. The highlight, ironically, this is when last November because I was serving during the pandemic, they weren't able to officially do an inauguration. So in November, they flew me to Ottawa with my entourage, which was a lot of fun. And they had a big party, and I was able to view the craziness of government interacting with, the issues. They're like a bunch of boys and girls having a big fight in a playground. And I got to go see the Senate chambers where normally the public isn't allowed. And it was really the highlight of my career was that meeting of watching these people and meeting some of the senators that I served. But having said that, other organizations could commission work from me, and I could charge them a pretty penny as a poet.
That's great.
Yeah.
Porsha, you are currently the Poet Laureate for the City of Boston. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about, in this role, how you support the work of the city and represent the populations through your work. Is it also a poetry on demand situation for you as well?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And it's also just an honor to sit up here and consider the experience of a poet, but also someone who's serving in the laureateship. I think similar, there's a line that I like to quote in regards to Boston's Poet Laureate and the position of the Poet Laureate, which is to integrate or bring poetry to the everyday lives of citizens, which is very broad and can be absolutely anything, which is exciting because it means I get to decide what it looks like. I think for me, in terms of service, it's been a lot of, I like to say I'm a selfish organizer. in that I am interested in bringing things that I want or would have liked to have. And so I do a lot of youth work and starting a youth poet laureate here, as well as the Roxbury Poetry Festival, which is just a free, high quality programming. Also do a partnership with the Fine Arts Work Center to bring poets from Boston to study in P-Town or in Provincetown on the Cape for a week under an instructor of their choice. And so that's a little bit about what I've been doing here in the city. But overall, I'm just here to answer the call, right? So it depends. Fortunately, they they do ask for commissions, not very much so from the government itself and government officials, although sometimes that does come up, but oftentimes from a lot of organizations. So I think that answered the question.
It did, and thank you for answering our call tonight, both of you, and being here. I'm going to take a question from the audience that also sort of lends itself to a question I had about process for both of you. And this audience member is asking, how do you harness the pain of lineage, ancestral trauma into words that are both poignant and beautiful? So I don't know if either of you want to take that first.
Come again?
Do you have?
I agree. Can you say it again, actually?
How do you harness the pain of lineage and ancestral trauma into words that are both poignant and beautiful?
Yeah, I mean, my initial response is that it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it, right? Not to be the bearer of bad news, no, or history, really. I think I ask myself this all the time, is how am I doing this work and why am I doing it? I literally wrote something down today with my students that suggested I was still at the middle passage. You know, it's like something that I'm just constantly thinking about, or would like to argue that we are in the wake of, you know, as Christina Sharp says. But I think for me, it's about also exercising joy, right? So like I feel an inquiry, right? I feel a desire to explore and understand and write about history and my ancestors and their resistance. And so it feels innate. It feels like something I can't ignore. But I think I also always have to couple it with joy and like doing things that feel good and feel like we're discovering and talking about things, but also at the site of pleasure. And then, you know, in the context of a poem in and of itself, I guess I'm thinking a lot about distance in a poem. You know, the ability to say I and also mean someone else or someone who is not me in that moment, or the ability to look at something from a different lens that places a little bit of distance between me and the trauma. And the same is true for whoever's reading the poem or hearing the poem, right? Is that there hopefully is a little bit of distance. Like I could tell you about the watermelon and what it really means, but let's just start from the scientific aspect of the plant and then we can infer, you know?
Thank you, Porsha. You touched on a question then that I had. Both of your work is deeply personal at times. Is there a difference between writing a piece and then speaking the words and intentions out loud to an audience like you did tonight? So do the pieces ever take on a different meaning in composition versus performance?
I'll let you go first, or if you want to answer that last one.
Oh my
too.
goodness, I don't know how to answer these questions. They're very complex. In terms of, I have to speak the truth not only from the personal, but it's not like I said earlier to many of the classes. Sometimes the eye is just a little fingertip of your baby finger, and it really encompasses the whole community, many, many people. So one particular poem is really not necessarily about me, you know, and people make that mistake that it's totally autobiographical. But I also need to put the I in so I can identify, go into the psyche of other people's pain and joy and whatnot, to be able to capture those feelings and those images, you know. So your second question is, what about process? When when I'm writing, and after I'm finished writing and I've got a manuscript, I throw it on the floor. I really do. You know, I just scatter my papers on the floor, and what I call that sculpturing and pruning. And then I find how to tie it together. And after I tie it together, but also after I finish reading a poem, I actually walk it. I walk my poems out loud, and if I stumble, it means that's a bad word. That doesn't fit in, you know, because walking is a natural poetic process, and as breathing is, and so that's what I do in terms of getting it out on paper. And I took a little. My mom was a great storyteller, and she was very animated, and so was my father. And I reflect back on that, but I also took one smidge of a voice course, you know, voice lessons, so that I could learn how to emphasize. Because when I was in residential school, how they taught me to ask questions was like this: "How are you?" Because I didn't know how to ask a question, because when we ask a question in my community, okay, of the elders, they'll go like this: "Let me check my policy." They'll open their hands, and that's their policy, okay? So I didn't know how to ask questions, and the nuns taught me that's how you ask a question. You bring this lilt.
Thank you so much. Porsha, any difference in composing versus sort of speaking it out loud?
Yeah, I think they go hand to hand when we talk about the walking or listening to the poem over and over again. But I think once you bring it in front of an audience, you get the chance to have it exist in a way that it hasn't before. You know, I have no idea how people will react, or even how I'll react in the moment. And you know, if I'm doing the best work I can, I am trying to live in the very breath of the poem, and feel it and see what's happening in the poem, and also be present in those moments, in every crevice of every letter. If I can like feel that, then I feel like I've done service to myself. But I do think there's a difference. I think there's like Dewinde is present, right? And you know, other folks can feel the spirit that connects both me and my voice to the audience, right? There's like something there that kind of like spirits us both.
Thank you for that. We are in the Museum of Science. As Tim mentioned at the start of the evening, through the work of our Centers for Public Science Learning, we will infuse the intellectual and creative capital of our communities into the museum, and we'll co-create experiences and products with our partners to inspire a lifelong love of science in everyone. And the year of 2024 will be our Earth Shot, focusing on climate and sustainability. And to fix a global issue that impacts everyone, we need to ensure that we are including and representing everyone in this work. And so, Louise, I'm hoping you can share, we talked a little bit about this on our call, if you could share about Indigenous ways of knowing and how these can be vital keys to solving societal issues like climate change.
Holy. Oh my goodness, Indigenous. It's a loaded question, you know, and that's not an easy answer. I've been reading this book, A Metaphorical Mind, by one of our Cree philosophers, and he was also a theologian, and he was also a therapist. And so what happened with him is that going back to the elders and learning the ceremonial ways really challenged his theological mind, because he was taught in Western tradition, right? And he had to shed a lot of concepts from that part of his life in order to go into the psyche of the community and what the elders and the ceremonies were saying. So with our ceremonies, the elders would say, this is our psychiatry, this is our psychology. And of course, being a wordsmith, I looked up those words, right? Which means wind, soul, and spirit. So when somebody goes into therapy, they're changing their way of perceiving. And but one of the ways I ask before I go to sleep at night, and I have a heavy duty question I want to address, I tell my spirit, please guide me to the answer. before I fall asleep. I present the question, and it may not come right away, but I'm a dreamer, so my dreams directly. And I'll give you an example. When I was in Ottawa, I had a dream that my Christmas cactus was telling me there was little white spots on his next door neighbor, a plant like this. And so I called my house sitter, and she said, "Oh, by the way, one of these plants has some white spots on it." So I get home, and my Christmas cactus was actually telling on her neighbor, which had aphids on it. So I dream, and I'm guided by that. I'm guided by nature when I'm walking out there, and I'm going, "You've got to pay attention." Like, how can somebody disregard the spirit of the water and the dualities of that water, the sacred and the profane, about the forest fires, the fire and the sacred and the profane, the mudslides, that earth in motion and movement, the great manifestation of the great mystery, We cannot ignore that. I don't know if that answered the question.
It did, and I have so many more, but I know we have limited time, so we'll have to do a sequel program where we bring you back, and we'll keep digging in.
Okay.
Porsha, a similar question. You are an Afrofuturist. Can you talk a little bit about the foundations of Afrofuturism and what we can learn from those principles in regards to climate change and resiliency?
Yeah, I think when you ask about, and just to clarify, I definitely identify as an Afrofuturist, but I might slightly be more Afro-pessimist. Disclaimer, no. But when you ask that question, I think about one of the founding principles of Afrofuturism, which suggests that time is a spiral, right? Like, time is not linear, and things are moving and progressing, but at certain points we keep returning to some of the same things, which also makes me think about Sankofa, right? And this idea of going back to get it. But that's what I think about Afrofuturism, right? Is that they would tell us that you know everything already, that you've been here before, and that you need to, when it comes to the earth, look and listen, and understand that you are a part of the same living body, but also that your people know how to work the land. Your people consistently know how to survive. Your people have always been resourceful when it comes to recycling, right? And using, for example, a hanger as an antenna is a type of green ideology. So I definitely think that's something that would come out of that, just the framework. But then I also think about Octavia E. Butler, who people have dubbed as the fairy godmother of Afrofuturism. But she wrote about the apocalypse based off the lived experience of the everyday, of just seeing and understanding people's behavior, and then predicting most things that have been happening today to a T. And I guess what Octavia Butler taught me is that community is the answer, right? Like, and sometimes your community suddenly might be the people in this room, right? If something happened based off climate and we were together, we would be our new community, right? We would have to band together and figure out how to survive. And so I guess that's the one thing I'm always thinking about is, who is my neighbor? Who's gonna help me or give me insert item here, and who am I gonna serve and look out for? And I think for me, Octavia Butler, people say she's the godmother of Afrofuturism, but I really think just futurism. Like, I think she really saw across race lines in an interesting way. But
thank you for that. And I mean, I think you both just demonstrated why it's so vital that we provide space to learn from each other and learn from other cultures and communities. And not just solely, I mean, this program is great and we're so thankful to be here, but not just solely during heritage days like Indigenous Peoples Day or the upcoming Heritage Month of Native American Heritage Month in November, but really all year round and consistently. And so I'm hoping you can just share why you think it's important that institutions like the Museum of Science and other cultural institutions celebrate, support, and open our halls to communities all year round. Another loaded question, I know, but...
Why should the Museum of Science and, I was going to say Museum of Science and Industry, I'm from Chicago.
It's
and
okay.
That's what our museum is called, forgive me. But why and how should we continuously have these conversations?
Yes, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's all related. I think we like to pretend that STEM is not related to the humanities, when the reality is it very much so is. Um, Christina Sharp, who I'm like slightly obsessed with, has this quote that suggests, um, how could we talk about climate change without actually talking about the climate of us or the climate that we're in? But that's what I think. I think that like for example, racism is embedded in absolutely everything. And maybe you have to peek a little harder to see, but I think it is a part of the STEM conversation, both in how it shows up in stats, but also, i.e., the watermelon, which I will probably refer to one too many times. But
Thank you.
At the University of Lethbridge in southern Alberta, there's a Blackfoot elder on the faculty, and he is a vice provost, and his name is Leroy Littlebear. And not only is he a philosopher, but he's a natural scientist without your degrees. And so they've hired him and I think that's what you have to do is go to community and find out who your natural philosophers without studying the academia, because they're coming from a place of roots. And I would have to go back to my elders who know how to read the land. And I've learned some of it, but I could never say that I'm an expert at it, because we have our medicine people all have different roles within our own systems. We have dreamers, we have healers, who have people who have medicines and healers. I mean that it's not only the physical healing that they do without touching you. So it's really rich, and that's where you'll need to go, is to the grassroots elders who know these ways of knowing, perceiving, and studying the land.
Thank you so much. Yes, for both of those answers, please. And another question we're getting, and I think this is a great final question for us to wrap up, so we can head to the reception and all of you can continue the conversation with both Louise and Porsha. What is next? What do we have to look forward to in your work? I know, Louise, you're on a whirlwind tour of Boston and the States right now. Do you have any new books coming out? What's next for you?
At the moment, I'm negotiating with one of the publishers, compiling my essays and presentations, my keynotes, and I want to match each essay, because the essay talks, it doesn't show, whereas poetry shows, and I want to show not only the difference, but to enrich the presentation. I also have another interest, and that is when I was in Germany, I saw the policies that were used against the Jews, and those same policies in this country were applied to my people, and I want to do a comparative analysis, a poetic analysis of both those policies. So I have a lot of interests, too much passion, not enough time.
Thank you for sharing something for us all to look forward to. Porsha, you have some exciting news. I've been so excited for you to share this all day.
So I'll start by saying I'm working on a manuscript that is about water and the Black diaspora, as well as queer intimacy, calling it WET. And really the historical site of gendered captivity at the site of the Middle Passage. Didn't mean to get so excited and then bring us back. And then also I've been working to open a bookstore in Dorchester, which I'm really excited about, with Bing Broderick, that is scheduled to open in February of 2024. Yeah.
And I believe there's some information in the program. Otherwise, please come down and chat with both of these incredible people about all of their work that you heard tonight on the stage. All of Louise's books are listed in the virtual program where you can purchase them for your local booksellers. Thank you both so much for being here at the museum, for coming to Boston. Let's have another hand for them, please. A huge thank you to our friends at the Consulate, David Goulet, and the Poets Theater, to Tim Ritchie for being here tonight and starting us off, and for all of you for tuning in and being here. We hope to see you back here at the museum soon. We're going to say goodnight to our friends who are watching online. Thank you for tuning in. And we invite all of you to stick around, join us one level down in the reception, and we'll see you there. Thank you so much.